And as you just heard, French lawmakers are debating whether or not to give forces in Mali the green light to stay on. They most probably will. Operation Serval, of course, began back in January. And since then, Al-Qaeda-linked jihadists have been chased out of the country's towns and cities. The Prime Minister, Jean-Marc, said earlier that it's more or less mission accomplished.
I've come here to solemnly announce that Operation Serval is a success, and all French people should be proud of this. It is a success, first of all, politically, because the president's decision to intervene completely changed the balance of power between the Malian army and the terrorist groups. This operation immediately allowed French troops to stop an offensive on Bamako. The determination with which it was carried out allowed the Malian government to reinstate its authority on its entire territory.
Well, French troops have already begun to leave Mali, and the government says just 1,000 soldiers will remain until the end of the year. That's for training purposes. So tonight I'll be asking, is Mali really now on the path to peace? Joining me to discuss, Emmanuel Dupuy is president of the Institute for Prospective and Security Studies in Europe. On my left, Roland Marchal is senior fellow at CNRS. Michael Kirtley is a journalist and filmmaker. I'm also joined here by Konare Dougoukolo. He's a Malian researcher at Université Paris Descartes. He also works as a psychologist. And in Brussels tonight, Arnaud DANJEAN is a French member of the European Parliament, a member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs and chair of the Subcommittee on Security and Defence. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us here on France 24. Now, before we go on, let's take a quick listen to the opposition during that debate earlier. The former Defence Minister Hervé Morin has a very different take on what's going on in Mali.
We have to be patient. If we're ready to leave by the end of 2014, it will be a miracle. I'd like to remind you that we arrived in Chad in 1984 and we're still there.
If I may come to you first, do you agree with what Prime Minister Hervé said earlier? Has this mission been a success both militarily and politically, or is it, as Hervé Morin says, that he's just been far too optimistic?
I think there's a slight difference between a counter-terrorist operation and fighting against terrorism. Fighting against terrorism takes a more comprehensive approach. It brings in more non-kinetical actions. It takes, obviously, the need to forecast security, but then you have to assess stabilization, and I think this is where we're going now. I think what Prime Minister Hervé mentioned, mentioning the fact that the job has been done, is not quite true, because there's still some terrorists on the Malian soil. So that's the first objective, eradicate them totally. Maybe that is the reason why we're keeping troops. 2,000 till in
to the end of July, right.
Then 1,000 afterwards. And I should say that now we have to go into the political aspect of things. We've done the security aspect. Now it's time to get a bit more of political stabilization in the country. And that will take very long. OK,
Roland Marchal, the initial objective was, of course, to stop the Islamists from marching on the capital, Bamako. That initial objective has been achieved. Is it right, then, that the French should start to withdraw now?
It's very early. It's very early. It's based on a very optimistic assessment of the situation. We see that actions are still taking place in Timbuktu and Gao area. Kidal, we don't know, because actually nobody goes there, so there is a problem of access to independent information. And moreover, the key issue is those kind of crises can't be solved militarily. You need, as was just said, a more political approach, and we don't see what the French have achieved in 3 months politically. If you look back, they claim in a very undiplomatic manner that elections should be held by the end of July. It is nearly impossible, only for technical reasons, without discussing the politics of the elections. The international forces might be somewhat ready, but to do what? There is a huge challenge on this aspect. And then the issue of reconciliation, the issue of discussing among Malians what actually triggered this crisis hasn't yet started on a serious manner. So what will be next is maybe we could believe that we could win all battles and still lose the war. And this is really the risk France is facing at this stage.
Konare Dougoukolo, what's your take on it? Do you agree with the timetable as set out by French President François Hollande?
I believe that there are many different things conflicting in this situation. On the first hand, I believe that the French are being logical with what they previously said about the intervention in Mali. But we have to wonder about the end game of the intervention. Was it simply to free the main cities of the north, or was it was there a deeper motivation for the intervention? Because right now the
that was the initial objective, though, wasn't it? Yes, it was following a plea from Bamako.
I believe that for the Malians, we had many hopes about the French interventions in terms of giving a final clear solution to the security issues in the north of the country. And to these days, there have been reports of fightings even today and yesterday in the north of the country between different rebel groups and the army, and between those groups themselves. So with regards to that, there is still much to be done.
But if I could just pick you up on that, I mean, France is acting out of its own security interests. That is first and foremost for the French. They're not there to organise Mali.
It is logical for the French to actually stop the intervention, or at least withdraw some troops from Mali. And I believe the solution ultimately might come from a wider intervention force in Mali. So I'd say that maybe we need to give up on some of the hopes that we had put on the French army for this intervention.
Okay, Michael Kirtley, what are your thoughts? Because, you know, here we are planning a timetable for withdrawal. There is a risk, isn't there, that this could go down the same path as Afghanistan, mission creep, if you like. There was one objective, it then turned into something else, and then we've been there more than a decade. That must be very much on the minds of the French at the moment.
Well, right here you have, to frame it a little bit, you have a situation in Mali right now where it's a country that's, you know, bigger than France, and half of the country is run under some sort of military operation, either the Malian military or the French military or the MISMA force, or you've got the Tuareg MNLA and other forces that are operating in the north there. At the same time, you have a severe problem between the north and the south in terms of the political stability. And on the other hand, you've got the Southerners and the Northerners. In other words, the Northerners are made up of the former rebels and who are still fighting for a certain amount of autonomy there, who are saying that neither one of them really want the French to leave at this particular point. You've got also a huge issue in terms of the weather. It's getting a lot hotter right now. We're going into the rainy season. And so the French are in a situation where what is their reasonable choice? If they leave right now, they're looking at a situation where they're probably going to be leaving a mess behind. There's nothing that's been resolved politically in the country. You don't have any. The Malian government is a transitional government right now. They're in a situation where they don't have any administration throughout much of the country. How could they possibly be thinking of doing a presidential election unless that presidential election only concerns 100 kilometers from Bamako and into the city? So if the French were to leave right now, they would be leaving a situation where everybody could blame them for having left a mess behind.
Right. I mean, what's your thought on the election? I mean, François Hollande is pretty clear about this. He wants elections in Mali at the end of July at the latest. I mean, here we are mid-April and it's still a very divided country with a lot of security issues. Do you think he should abandon that aim?
Well, I believe it's not very realistic to think about those elections in terms of how can they bring back democracy in Mali. Because even to this day, we have a president who's not even the real acting ruler of the country, because you still have the problems with the junta. They're still the ones holding the power. So there is no proof that we're going to have a ruling president after the elections. So that's the first problem. And the second one is that there are hundreds of thousands of Malians still outside of Mali in refugee camps. So do we consider those people as sub-level citizens? And also the issue of Kidal is still very much something that has yet to be resolved. And we have no clue as to the liberation of Kidal by the Malian army or by the French army, because right now the Malian army cannot really be trusted with handling the situation in that region, because there have been fightings and there have been attacks on civilians made by the army before. So right now we are at crossroads, both politically and militarily, for Mali, and I think that's why we need a more solution on the long term with regards to Mali, not only from the French, but from the whole international community.
Roland, Marchal, what are your thoughts on the way the French are pushing for this election by the end of July?
Now, there is a need to change the leadership of the country. This is clear, and I think everyone would agree. Elections might be, I say might, be a way as well to get rid of the junta, which is still influential, though not as powerful as before the intervention. The point is, if you look, the political system has collapsed. How could you address this crisis in such a short-term basis and then have election that will convince the population that really we are in a new period where more democracy, less corruption, and peace? I believe the French, for their own reasons, want the election to take place. What would have been wiser would have been to advocate for, I would say, a new interim president, someone elected, not so well elected because of the IDPs and the refugees, maybe with a mandate of only 2 years, but throughout those 2 years, carry out the duties of and the task of reconciliation in the country, not only in the north, because there are so many grievances as well in the south, and make people feel more confident that the political system is rebuilt on a much more healthy basis than is going to be the case right now.
Emmanuel Dupuy, is it too soon for elections?
Well, I think it has already been mentioned. There's both political difficulties and technical difficulties. You know, in the long experience of state building, having elections takes a lot. To prepare the election takes a lot of time, at least 6 months. We are in a 3 months agenda, so that's the first difficulty. Then the other difficulty is on which electoral base. We've mentioned the fact that almost 470 IDPs are located inside and outside of Mali, in the 4 neighboring countries. There's another problem, and it's a religious problem. If the elections are going to be due in July, we are entering in the Ramadan period, so that is very difficult also to assess these elections. And I would complete what Roland said. There is a need for a transition period. That means maybe a transitional president, but that could also mean transitional institutions. And of course, everything will not be dealt with the election. What will be dealt with is having a stable, robust, and legitimate government by the end of 2013. You said that France wanted the election. That's not quite true, because the elections were drafted and brought about throughout the feuille de route.
The French, François Hollande is pushing for that election to go ahead as planned at the end of July.
Not only him.
Not only him, no,
but
as you say, everybody is very much wanting the French to stay at the moment.
I just wanted to advocate the fact that he's not the only one, and he's not the hardest or the harsher to ask for this election.
Do you think most people in Mali want an election?
No, because they're saying we're not ready for that.
They're saying they're not ready.
I don't see how that many people in Mali could want an election. I mean, there's no... It doesn't seem reasonable to think about the logistics involved with all the different things that have been mentioned. But most of all, before it depends. I mean, I think the idea of a transitional delegation of a government there, of a president there, that makes certain sense if it's kind of accepted by people on all sides. But the truth is that there's also a huge problem that people seem to forget, and that is this all came about because of great inequities between the northern part of the country and the southern part of the country. This whole process, this whole mess began a year and a half ago when the MNLA was trying to negotiate with the president of Mali at that particular time, ATT, Mr. President Konare, and then Traoré. I mean, at that particular time, it was rejected. Right now, the government of Mali is still rejecting any kind of negotiations with the MNLA because they consider them an enemy force. They're talking to them in some form or another, but they're not saying they're willing to do official negotiations. How can anybody think that there are more things, there are more important, urgent things to deal with, including the hunger problem, including the IDP problem, and I think that if there is an intervention from the outside, from the United Nations, for example, they're going to be faced with huge humanitarian problems there as well as anything else.
I mean, there are some calls for some kind of UN representative, some kind of technocrat to oversee the transition to democracy. Would that be something that might work for Mali?
Well, I think that some people do want the elections. The politicians and the army, they want the election. The junta wants to have more legitimacy. They want the international community to think that everything is going back to normal. And the politicians, I think, in a way, they're afraid that they're going to lose their grasp on power, and all the reforms that are needed for the country might be actually shot in the shadows. But about the UN-led intervention, for instance, I think that if the UN decides to have a presence in Mali, it needs to be much deeper, not only something about the security, the safety of the country, but also about reforming justice and even the political class.
But would that be something that a peacekeeper mission could achieve?
I think something akin to what happened in the Balkans in the 90s is something that we need to look at. Because right now, we're talking about reconciliation, and the Malian justice has yet to prove that it can actually lead a reconciliation. And the Malian army, although many are really eager to go and fight to free their country, something needs to be said. Many of them aren't well trained. They don't have the Republican value fostered in them. So how can anyone expect them to keep a country together after elections? So I really think that there needs to be a time, maybe a couple of years, during which sort of middle or third partner comes in and helps the Malians to talk amongst themselves and to train again to what a democracy ought to be.
All right. A very quick word, Emmanuel Dupuy, then we have to go to break.
Just mentioning the fact that United Nations mission is already on the ground in Bamako. UNOM has an existence. The problem is, what form do we give it to it? Do we give it a very robust Chapter 7 mission, which could lead, as you mentioned, of keeping peacekeepers in the north? But I think we're not into that now, and with the next resolution, which is going to be drafted at the United Nations, mentions the fact that there's a will and the necessity to have also a very political stabilizing unit in Mali to help the reconstruction of the political environment. Just have this figure, 148 political parties in Mali for these elections.
Okay. Let's just end on that impressive statistic. We're going to have to take a short break. When we come back, the headlines in the second part of tonight's debate. Stay with us.